This interview is brought to you by Lumosity.
It is my great pleasure to be joined by Tim Schafer, founder, president, CEO of Double Fine. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me here.
Now, obviously, we're doing this on the occasion of Broken Age Act 1 coming out. I just kind of want to talk for a bit about sort of the journey, both of Broken Age and of Tim Schafer. It was around about 2 years ago this time. We were in Vegas for the DICE conference. The Kickstarter had happened, and the rather, now in retrospect, modest goal that you guys had set for yourselves had not just been hit, it had been well surpassed. We're looking at probably about $2 million. Sort of from where you were at that moment, where I kind of gathered things were getting a little bit tight and dire for Double Fine. Now, not only is Broken Age coming out, but you have so many other projects that are in the pipeline. Just sort of looking back at old Tim and the Tim that is here now. How's that been?
Yeah, because we were there at DICE pitching a new game that ended up not getting made. We were just going into those pitch meetings, you know, begging someone for money, which is the old way we used to do things. And so that was an interesting transition because we're doing that while on the other hand, just making unexpected money from our fans themselves. So that was kind of a harbinger of how things were going to change for us. And now we're an independent publisher of our own titles, thanks to Kickstarter and also our friendly investors like Indie Fund and Dracogen, who have started us being able to be self-sufficient, which is a whole new world for us.
Now, I think we use the phrase quite easily, like, oh, it's nice not to have sort of like the publisher and like, you know, those types of investors kind of, you know, managing, keeping an eye on the production. But really, I mean, if you could go into detail about how different it is to be working on something like Broken Age, where I don't want to say you have a ton of freedom. You still have to get the product out, and you have budgetary restrictions, but how different it is from the more traditional model when you have financing from a publisher.
Yeah, I mean, basically, whenever you need money from someone else, it doesn't come without strings attached, you know? And so it's not that the publishers are evil or bad, they're just investing millions of their own dollars, and they want to hear from you how you're not going to lose it. And so instead of just working on making the game great, you're also working on making the game great and making an investor feel great. And that takes a certain amount of time and leads you to certain compromises you normally wouldn't make. Like, this character has some quality about them that someone is worried is going to alienate this amount of the public. But you don't want to change that character, but they want you to change it because you're going to lose them money. And so that leads to awkward conversations you just don't want to have. And with getting like an angel investor or doing Kickstarter, or ideally using your own funds that you've made from these other projects, you can make that call. You can be like, do I still care about that character being, you know, this certain description? Yes, and so you can. That's your own money you're kind of risking. So for us at Double Fine, who want to do games that maybe aren't traditional, or we want to make them, really strive for something unique every time, that's inherently risky, and it just is a better fit for us to be able to take our own risks than, you know, risking someone else's money and trying to explain why we're making that risk.
Obviously, I don't know how many Kickstarter investors or participants or
about 90,000, yeah.
So I have to throw this out there. Was there ever a sense of concern that 90,000 were the people that wanted to play the Double Fine game? And are there ever those concerns that you can't reach that wider audience than the ones who invested in the first place?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's something we think about, but the difference is that those 90,000 had paid for the game in advance. So if you stick to that original budget, but who would do that? But if you stick to that original budget, the game is broken even before you even started, because, you know, I mean, what happened with our game was it started to become a real, I just had a lot of faith in it after we started working on it. It just looked so great, and it was, really fell in love with the characters and wanted to put our own money, like Double Fine's own money. So we more than matched the money we made off the Kickstarter of our own funds going into it to make it now this two-part game.
One of the most interesting things that came out of this sort of Kickstarter revolution is that you're looking at budgets for games that are like $2.5 million. That's not a number, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you really sort of see out there. It's either much smaller in the other end of the indie scene, or much larger if you're getting sort of financing out of an EA or an Activision or a company like that. Am I right in seeing it that way? And does that bring with some challenges because you don't know how far that really goes?
I mean, it's a unique, maybe unique in the industry, and there are a lot of like $20 million games, and there are a lot of like $200,000 games. Yeah. But we've been working in that space for a while. I mean, Costume Quest and Stacking and What's What a Monster and Iron Brigade. A lot of the games that we've been making recently have been in that kind of zone, because we wanted to make a game that still felt substantial, but leverage things like our engine to make them a little, existing tech makes it a little cheaper to get them made. So it is a unique spot, but I feel comfortable in it.
Well, Broken Age is a point-and-click adventure. I think what I found so kind of exciting about what's been happening recently is, so we have a point-and-click adventure. Brian Fargo is bringing back the kind of isometric, turn-based RPG. All of these sort of, game genres that have fallen by the wayside as something that was sort of a time past are getting to be resurrected. Do you sort of see the landscape in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really speaks to something deep that is changing, I think, in the entire entertainment field, which is that there used to be these kind of collections of money and gatekeepers around the money. Like, you can have this money, but we're going to decide what gets made. And therefore, like I was talking about with risk mitigation, you have to prove your thing's not risky. Or prove that, like, it's not, like, why should that big pile of money, why should it give me some money from my thing that, there's a market for, but it's a smaller market than this other thing, which is proven to be huge. We can imitate this other game and definitely make a bunch of money. And the gatekeeper would say, no, let's go that way. Let's go to that other route, which will lead to tons and tons of money. But I think what the internet and crowdfunding has allowed us people to do is to organize and take what would have been called a niche audience before. Let those people get together, whether they're adventure game fans or RPG, isometric fans or Veronica Mars fans, like, get together and be like, no, we want this thing to happen. And even if the gatekeepers say no, we're going to say yes with our own money. And they made it happen, which I think is really kind of deep and powerful, like a big change to happen. And it's not like it's going to tear down those gatekeepers, because they can still make a ton of money with their games. It's just that other people like us are not dependent on them, and we don't have to have those awkward conversations where we're trying to convince them we're going to make a bunch of money with this thing. We can just mobilize our people who want the game that we're making, and have them pay for it themselves. And I think it will lead to just more like passion projects like that.
Do you sort of see somewhere down the line that you might be working with big publishers again? I mean, obviously, when things are getting more radical, with crowdfunding, there's a lot of experimentation. Over time, that can become the new norm, where you would look, quite valuable in their eyes.
Well, I think we still work with publishers. It's just that we aren't in this desperate position of like, hey, we're going to go out of business in 2 weeks. Will you please give us a publishing deal? And so we have to take whatever onerous terms are in there, like losing our intellectual property rights or things. We used to have to take every deal that came along. Now we can just take good deals that make sense. And those are better for publishers, better for us, because we're not so antagonistic and mad that they took our IP away. So we can have better relationships with them when it makes sense for us to partner up. Because there's some things that are really, a game like Brutal Legend would be hard to, a game of that scope would be hard to do on our own. But the appeal of making smaller games is hard to think about leaving, because they can be riskier. You can take bigger chances on a smaller game, because you're not thinking about, should I believe in adventure games, but would I risk $25 million on it? Or, a smaller amount of money is just easier to take chances with.
And you get to go back to the genre that you've always been associated with, but ironically has yet to be sort of published by Double Fine, which is the point-and-click adventure. I mean, was it nice? Was it refreshing? Was it daunting to go back to something after so long away from it?
It was nice, and it was comfortable to go back to, and it was really nice to get that reaction from people who really love those kind of games and who, felt kind of underserved, and it was nice to and also show our team at Double Fine, who I've been working with. And there's always been a part of me that's always kind of making adventure games, whether it's Psychonauts or Brutal Legend. There's this part of me that's putting things in there that adventure games had, or a certain relationship with the characters, or a certain approach to puzzles, that maybe people who were making other kinds of games would be perplexed by. And now they're working on a real, an adventure game, kind of see where that comes from. So maybe they understand me and my tortured roots, and while I'm always pushing for dialogue trees.
Hey, and they're really funny. I mean, it's rewarding to actually go through every dialogue option, because something I wasn't expecting tends to happen as a result of it. I think the other thing that strikes me is, and I've just gone through this, is this a game? What does a game have to qualify as a game? And there's so much interest right now in, it's either open world, or it's got multiple endings, or there's branching paths, something that kind of puts a lot on the player to kind of carve their own space out of the game world. That is not what an adventure game is. It's very directed. You're pretty much the master of the world. I'm curious if you thought like you might be trying to introduce a genre where sort of tastes and desires has shifted so greatly that it might not be compatible.
I mean, it's interesting because there's people who definitely almost argue against authorship. That they're like, you know, I'm a game player, why should I do what the designer wants me to do? And I think that's totally valid. And there are definitely games where player self-expression, that's the main thing about those games. And I think if you're going to say, no, I'm making a game where actually what the designer designed for you is worth it. Like, we're going to make this world that's worth it to put you into, and instead of you doing absolutely anything you want, if you actually uncover the story that I planted here for you, that it'll be worth it. And I think that it just takes a lot of commitment to like say, I'm going to make this worth it for you. I'm going to gather the best art and writing and voice and everything, the presentation that I can, so that if you put yourself in our hands, you'll be entertained.
Now, is this something that you kind of foresee doing after Broken Age Act 2 is resolved and we have the entire story? Do you see yourself still doing more point-and-click adventures?
I mean, I don't know. We always have wanted to do, I mean, if you look at Double Fine games, especially, each one is so completely different than the last one.
Really
the idea of doing the same thing twice doesn't really sound like something we would probably do, but we do have that engine now.
That's true. That's true. You have the tech.
And we have added that to
down.
our bag of tricks, is 2D animation and all that stuff that we. But who knows? I mean, we have just a lot of ideas, and when we do things like Ninja Fortnite, which you're seeing, that we just the amount of creativity in that company is just something you don't want to restrict. And by saying what we're going to do in advance, it's like every year we come up with new ideas, and they're crazy and they're really diverse, and that's, I would never want to, you know, muzzle that by saying we're definitely going to do the same thing again.
On that note, and despite what you just said, you know, with the closing of LucasArts because of the acquisition of Lucas by Disney, I think a lot of people were wondering if the rights for some of those, for Maniac Mansion, for Grim Fandango, if they're out there, if they're available, because it's hard to imagine Disney suddenly investing in point-and-click adventures.
It is. I mean, that's always been. No matter where those rights are, they're probably, when they're with a large company, it might not behoove them to, we're now going to make a whole bunch of new graphic adventures, and but it would make sense in some ways for us. You know, it would make sense for our community, and we could bring a lot of attention to it and do really great things with it. I think only the original creators could really like see those stories go further, I think.
I mean, do you have any sense that you might somehow be able to get possession of those rights, or even Psychonauts for that matter?
Well, I mean, the idea that they're just available is not correct.
Yeah.
I mean, with any large company, just getting their attention and saying, hey, are you guys using that? You know, rarely they'll be like, oh yeah, never mind, you can have that. You know, like, it's usually like, yeah, we don't give away things, so and we might use that someday, and it's not even worth my time to talk to you about that thing because I'm really busy on this thing over here that's making so much money.
And J.J. Abrams has got to justify $1 billion in acquiring this entire company.
I mean, all those big companies are busy. They're busy with other stuff, and I just wish I could sneak in there and just kind of, you know, lift things out. But it's been a blessing and a curse. Like I on the other hand, you know, the reason I founded Double Fine so that I could own the things we make, you know, so I don't have to think about Grim Fandango and Full Throttle being in someone else's hands and someone else making a sequel to those games. But it also has kept me making up new things. You know, maybe if I had the rights to those games, I would have made sequels to them and therefore not done new things. And so we've, you know, always been forced to come up with new ideas, and that's also good.
And it's resulted in probably the most prolific period that you've ever had, given the number of projects that are in the works and have even come out in the past couple of years.
And since we split into smaller teams, it's just been like, we had 2 games in our first 10 years, and then we made like more games than that in the next 2 years. You know,
I mean, it's got to feel good.
It's exciting because it's not just my ideas either; it's the ideas of the whole team. Just like my goal with Double Fine is like making this like machine that emits creativity. You know, it's just like this organic thing that's growing and new things are coming out of it. It's not just a one-to-one thing. If I put an idea and an idea comes out, it's more like there's like 5 ideas coming from all different places, and it can't be stopped, Adam. It's a monster.
And I'm more than happy for it to keep on doing this, because myself, I think many other people are just going to benefit from it. Tim, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right, with that, we would like to thank our sponsor, Lumosity. Lumosity makes brain training easy with fun and games based on neuroscience. They can help make any brain better by enhancing memory and attention. you can build custom training programs and get stats and summaries to track your progress and see where you need to improve. Over 40 million users have already experienced Lumosity's brain training, so go try it for yourself. You can get instant access and help support Rev3 Games by signing up at lumosity.com/Rev3Games.